Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar for those in person and on Zoom. We're so excited to have you here today. This is the 10th presentation in our semester of 13. So there's 3 more presentations over the next 3 weeks, skipping Thanksgiving week. So we hope you'll join in for those as well. And I feel like I'm missing something that Brad usually says. Oh yes, this series is co-sponsored by the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee and the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs. So thank you so much to everybody who helped us with this. And we're very excited to have our speaker here with us today, Lauren McGrath. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. It's such a pleasure to be here at Westchester. So my name's Lauren McGrath. I'm the director of the Watershed Protection Program at Willistown Conservation Trust. And today I'm going to be presenting 7 years of research on the Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creek watersheds. So one important thing about the work that I do is I'm associated with a land protection organization called Willistown Conservation Trust. And we're just down the road, about 15 minutes away in Newtown. And our work is really focused on protecting and maintaining open space. So while land protection is kind of the core of our work, our heart and soul is really centered around building meaningful connections between people and the landscape. So as a land trust, we're kind of unique because we have a diverse suite of programming that is science-based. So we have a habitat stewardship program that is really focused on improving habitat across our 5 public preserves and working with landowners to improve the landscape through tree plantings and lawn conversion work. We have a 6-acre regenerative agriculture program that's located on Rushton Woods Preserve, which is a really cool apprenticeship style training program where you can work shoulder to shoulder with skilled farmers to learn more about food production and soil regeneration. We have a bird conservation program that is really centered on creating and improving habitat for migratory birds. So we have a spring and fall migration project. It's currently saw-whet owl banding season, as well as there's a grassland birds program, which is really cool. And I'm here representing the Watershed Program. So if you would like to learn more about how to get involved, volunteer and internship opportunities, you can visit wctrust.org. But immediately in my introduction, I introduce a bunch of jargon. The first of which being the word watershed. So watershed is not a pump house. It is not a well house. It is the area of land around a body of water that drains to a common outlet. And there is a lot of really important context for studying waterways to understand your watershed. The land around the body of water you're studying has everything to do with the water quality that you're seeing on the landscape. So there are a handful of synonyms that I am guilty of using, including drainage, basin, and catchment. There are subtle differences in the vocab, but for the context of today's talk, you can assume that all of those means that landscape around your body of water. Fair? All right. So if we start to reconsider our boundaries on the landscape, instead of thinking about where we are as in a building, in Westchester, at the university, on a farm, in a city, I want to challenge everyone to consider what watershed you're in. Because if we look at this map, which is one of my favorite maps of all time, this is the lower 48 broken out by watersheds. So things look a little bit different than the maps we're used to looking at of the United States. And so the big pink blob in the middle, this is the Mississippi Basin. And the Mississippi is it is the largest watershed in the continental United States. It drains about 1/3 of the country. And it is an ungainly and unwieldy watershed to look at all at once. It's massive. So traditionally, when you have a really large watershed with a very diverse suite of stressors, you break it into sub-watersheds. And then things start to get a little more manageable. For the mighty Mississippi, you can have sub watersheds down to small order streams that are draining smaller areas of land where it's easier to design management plans. So what I love about the Mississippi is that it actually starts in Pennsylvania. So the Ohio River Basin starts in Western Pennsylvania and drains down to the Gulf. So if you are planting trees outside Pittsburgh, you are inadvertently benefiting the Gulf. And if you have a candy wrapper that falls out of your car and washes into the Ohio, there's a chance it may actually make it down to the Atlantic. So when we start to think about watersheds from this landscape perspective, it embodies the Think Globally, Act Locally initiative that has been popular in the last decade or so. And this is becoming more and more important as we're facing a more unstable climate future. Every 2 years, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection puts out the Integrated Waters Report. And this is a fascinating, detailed report. You can look at the stream outside your house and find if it is rated as healthy or unhealthy. And this is a massive, massive task because Pennsylvania is one of the most water rich states in the country, with almost 29,000 miles of streams and rivers contained within our one state. So that being said, the 2024 report found that 1/3 of our streams are considered impaired. And an impairment is really anything that is stopping a waterway from achieving its designated use. So the designated use could be supporting wildlife, it could be for recreation, water supply, or fish consumption. So it's a little concerning that we see 1/3 of streams and rivers statewide are not attaining this, any one of these designated uses. And when we zoom in a little closer, we see that that number jumps up to 79% of streams and rivers in Chester County and 95% of streams and rivers in the Delaware County. So this makes a lot of sense if we think historically about the most impacted parts of the state, right? Chester and Delaware County have had European management style activity since the 1600s, 1700s. So we have several hundred years of changes to the landscape that are causing different behaviors in our streams and rivers than what we would anticipate historically. And one of the major changes is the shift from forest-dominated landscapes. We know that this region would have been almost entirely forested, meadowed, or wetland before the arrival of European settlers. So when we take these habitats, which basically act as a huge sponge on the landscape, and we remove them and we replace them with spaces for agriculture, industry, or housing, we substantially shift the behavior of the landscape and the influence on the waterway. So impervious surfaces are a really key piece of our landscape studies when we're looking at stream health. And for the context of this talk, an impervious surface is any surface made often by humans, but not always. There are naturally occurring impervious surfaces like bedrock that water cannot pass through. For our talk today, we're going to be really thinking about impervious as that human-created landscape. So thinking roads, parking lots, driveways, rooftops. And so impervious surface cover is that percentage of the landscape that has been hardened, right? That we have shifted from our sponge, delicious, holding water capacity landscape to this solid runoff generating landscape. Does that all make sense? Cool. This is really important to consider because development has been going on in this region for hundreds of years. And we are moving into a more and more uncertain climate regime with predictions in the next 100 years of more water falling annually, so more frequent large storms. And when you have more frequent large storms, that means you have larger periods of no rain. So the concern is we are going to be looking at storms more like what we saw last week, where we got about 2.5 to 3 inches of rain in a day and then nothing for a couple of weeks. This is really stressful on our stream systems because we historically have had springs that are full of seeping rains that slowly fall and absorb into the soil. And now we've shifted and are shifting into big, heavy deluges that come, flow off the landscape into our creeks and then away. So the stress of heavy rainfall is really negative on our stream systems, but equally as stressful are the periods of dry. So I don't know if everyone was here last year, but southeastern Pennsylvania, for the first time since weather was being recorded in Philadelphia, had no rain in the month of October, which is normally a fairly damp month. So even with that, we were only just below the average rainfall for this last calendar year, October to October, because we got several massive storms that brought a lot of rain very quickly, rather than these less frequent, smaller rainfall events. So we know that we're going into an unstable future. So it's really important to know where we're coming from with the health of our streams and rivers. So the key questions in our study are, first, what is the status of the headwaters of Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creeks? This is where our program area is focused. This is where our research takes place. Why are sections of these streams not achieving their full capacity to support their designations? Why are they impaired? And then, because we're a land trust organization, is there a relationship between our land protection efforts and water quality? And can we actually quantify that impact of land protection and restoration? So for the actual work that we're doing, we have 2 projects that I'll be describing kind of side by side today. The first is our monthly water chemistry data collection. And the data I'm sharing today is actually coming out in December as a full report, so you can see and read everything and a whole lot more. And the data that we're looking at is from January 2018 through December of 2024. That's just the analysis window. We have continued sampling. We actually sample tomorrow. And we go out every 4 weeks to 10 sites across the headwaters of Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creeks. We have 5 sites in the Ridley Creek watershed, 4 sites in Crum, and then as of this project, we only started with 1 site in the Darby Creek watershed. We are not going out and targeting events. We set our calendar, and every 4 weeks we go out. So that means in periods of drought, in periods of storm, we're going out. We're not waiting for base flow or going out specifically for high flow events. So one data point in the Darby Creek does not actually tell a very good story. So in 2021, we partnered with the Darby Creek Valley Association with the goal of adding 4 to 5 more sites in the Darby Creek watershed to get a better understanding. I don't know what was in the air. Probably a lot of interest in volunteering without being in a group after COVID, but the program exploded. And we now have 46 sites across the entirety of the Darby Creek watershed, where volunteers go out every 4 weeks over a 4-day period to collect water chemistry data with us. So these volunteers are trained by myself and my staff to collect this data, and then they submit it every month. For the analysis, we have 25 sites that are over 2 years old that we are using to compare data. So this entails over 5,000 measurements. This project is completely free to volunteers, and all of the data is available online. So if you want to explore deeper, you're welcome to, and I have a QR code to the website at the end. So when we look at the 2 ranges between our high frequency monthly water chemistry data collection, which is data generated by skilled trained scientists, and our community science program, which is volunteer data, we have this huge regional subset with a high diversity of land uses to start looking at this relationship between land protection and water quality. Does that all make sense so far? Okay, cool. So to take a step back from the map, one of the first questions we had was, how does land use change across all of our program area and across the Darby-Cobbs watershed? So in purple, in the purple box are our 10 sites that we study monthly with our high frequency data set. And you can see that there's a higher proportion of green consistent across all 10 sites. These are sites that are within our focus program area, where we know we have a high concentration of protected open space and restoration. As you go outside of that box, you enter into the Cobbs and Darby Creek sites. And there is some really big variability. For our 10 high frequency sites, we have impervious surface, a percentage of impervious surface cover that ranges from 9 to 21%, and forest cover that ranges from 19 to 36%. So a pretty fair balance. In our community science sites, which extend all the way down to the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge, where the Darby Creek terminates, we have a much more wide-ranging land use with impervious surface cover ranging from 11 to 49% and forest cover ranging from 0 to 71%. So if there's no green, that means there's no forest. So Port DC WP1 is almost completely developed. And then we have DC LR1, which has a very high proportion of forest. It's a small tributary coming off of protected space. So these differences are really important because it really colors a lot of the data that we see. All right, so one of the first parameters that we were very keen on understanding is water temperature. Thermal pollution is a very big deal in our in aquatic ecosystems. So it can also be really tricky to know that temperature can vary by time of day, by seasonality, by the weather. It can also vary by the depth of the stream, the flow regime of the stream, and if there's groundwater coming in, it's going to be much colder. And then also, if there are a lot of trees or no trees, we might see differences from the direct sunlight entering our waterway and warming things up. So temperature can be really variable even among the same site with consistent visits. So this is why it's so important to have this long-term data set to understand what's going on seasonally. But it's so critical. It's one of the most important parameters that the state considers when looking at impairments. And this is because warm water is stressful for aquatic organisms. Warmer water contains less or lower concentrations of dissolved oxygen. And when you're an aquatic organism, you're still consuming oxygen through respiration. So as water temperatures increase, you have to work harder to pull oxygen out of oxygen-poor systems. So this increases aquatic organisms' metabolic rates. And this is really something to consider when you're looking at other contaminants of concern in your system. If you have, say, high levels of road salt entering your waterway and it's warm, that's a double whammy that can increase the mortality rate of some of these exposures to contaminants of concern. So one of the key things to remember, water temperature, as water temperature is warm, dissolved oxygen decreases. So here's some data. There's a lot happening on this slide. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is this yellow line. This is the state designated temperature maximum for a cold water fishery. And a cold water fishery is a fishery that can support the reproduction of cold water sensitive fish. Particularly brook trout is like the poster fish for cold water sites. The red dashed line is the state designated warm water fishery temperature maximum. So this is the maximum temperature to support the reproduction of our warm water fishes. So think carp, sunfish, bass. They can all tolerate a much higher temperature level. And then the orange hash dash line that cuts off the top of each of the peaks is the trout stocked fishery temperature limitation. So this is a temperature maximum for the survival of stocked trout, but not their reproduction. So when we look, you may notice that there's a gap from March 2020 through December. That was COVID. We were not sampling during this time. But at one of the most concerning trends,
So sorry. There you go.
is that
I'm trying to get to this and it's doing the wrong thing.
no
There you go.
In the late winter, so December through February, almost every site begins to exceed our warm water and cold water temperature maximums at least one time in the winter. And all sites exceed the summertime cold water fishery limitation. So this tells us a couple of things. First, at the sites where we are monitoring, we likely don't have cold water sensitive fishes. That does not mean that there are not cold water fish in Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creeks. Just at the sites where we're monitoring, we do not see conditions that can support their reproduction. 10 sites across 3 watersheds is only representative. So I hear stories that there are some small tributaries that do support brook trout. And I believe it fully for some of the sites, but anglers are not always the most reliable storytellers. So, you know, in the summertime, we see temperatures are within range for stocked trout most of the time. But in the winter, we see these temperature exceedances that are of great concern, because at the same time that we have warm seasonal variations in the winter is the time when some of our most sensitive organisms are at highest risk. And so that is of concern just for the thermal pollution, but also when we have these warm spikes in the winter, that is likely also related to road salt runoff entering our streams. So there is a lot of work being done, including here at Westchester University, to study and understand the relationship between road salt and aquatic life. So I'm not going to get into the aquatic life side of things too much today, but just remember that warm water is stressful, that salt is stressful, and taken together, there are reports coming out of loss of diversity because of these warm water spikes that are anticipated to continue into the future. So this is for just our 10 high frequency sites. There we go. When we add in our Darby Creek sites and take a step back and look at the relationship between land and water, we see a really cool trend. And that is, as impervious surfaces increase, so do annual water temperatures. So the sites in blue and green are Ridley sites. And what's interesting is for water temperature, when we just look at our high frequency sites, we don't actually see a relationship between temperature and impervious surfaces. However, when we add in the Darby Creek sites, which have a much higher range of variability of land use associations, we do see this pretty tight and significant relationship between more impervious surface and warmer waters, which makes sense, especially in the summertime when there's a rainstorm and it's hitting that hot asphalt, hot pavement and flowing into the creek. There's a huge amount of water temperature increase. But when we look at forest cover, we see the inverse of this relationship, where as you increase forest cover on the landscape, you actually see a decrease in water temperature annually. This is also significant. And as someone who would love to get a bulldozer and rip up all of the spaces that are not being used for much and restore them to habitat, like forest and wetland, that's not feasible, but we can plant trees. So as a land trust, this was really encouraging that we have the ability to actually cause direct improvements to the landscape over time through concentrated tree planting efforts. So really exciting to see this relationship And it is also strongly supported by literature and studies around the world. So I already introduced this concept of salt contamination. And for the context of this talk, salt is, we're going to be talking primarily about sodium chloride, which is the primary salt form that is in road salt. And there are local, regional, and national trends showing that our streams are getting saltier due to the over-application of salt to the landscape. Since the 1970s, we have actually tripled our salt application on the landscape, and it's leading to this stream salinization trend, where we are applying over 20 million metric tons annually. That's an insane amount of salt. And as you over apply salt to the landscape, it builds up in our soils and it builds up in our groundwater, which makes it a persistent issue now year round. And it's not just a winter problem. As we're seeing, we're starting to notice signs of stress in our aquatic system in the summertime as salt levels continue to rise. So last year with the drought, all of our sites got warm and all of our sites got salty. And it was October, so it wasn't because of road salt application in that window of time that we were looking, but over the last several decades. And it is a threat to our ecosystems, but also to human health. And there are a number of studies that have come out of New England, particularly Vermont, where groundwater has acquired a level of chloride that is high enough that if you're on a salt-restricted diet, you can exceed your daily doctor-recommended limit just by drinking tap water. So this is something that has really come to the forefront of the discussion for salt use. It's delicate. We want people to be safe and not slipping and falling, but we also want to make sure that we're not literally salting our soils into the future. And Ridley and Crum Creek are both direct drinking water sources. Darby Creek is not. However, all three of these waterways flow into the Delaware, which is a critical drinking water source for over 15 million people. So understanding the salt situation is really critical. And when we look kind of intuitively, if you have more impervious surface, you have higher salt levels. And this is true in our 10 high frequency sites. It's significant, but I want you to keep your eye on these three worst sites in the headwaters of Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creeks. Because when we add the Darby Creek community science data set in, we see that actually things are much worse further downstream. So there's some really interesting dynamics happening in this data set that we're still working on piecing apart. Particularly as you cross the threshold of about 35% impervious surface coverage on the landscape, there's a lot of variability in the salt data set. And we believe that this may be due to the over-engineered stormwater management system in the lower portions of the Darby and Copps watershed. So we have some that have high salt tons per sample, and then some sites which we would have anticipated to creep even higher up with their salt concentrations. But as they reach this kind of threshold, around 47% impervious surface, we actually notice that they drop. And we think what might be happening based on the literature is that these several sites are in parts of the watershed where they are channelized and piped. So rather than having the opportunity to have salt flow into soil embankments and stream sides, they're going into a channel, into a pipe, and being flushed out very quickly. So the salt isn't getting the same opportunity to build up in the surrounding ecosystem as we see in slightly less impervious areas. We're working on kind of teasing this apart. It's a very complicated relationship, especially in the lower portions of the Darby Copps, where there are a lot of stormwater management systems that are in place. So this is not to say that these sites are healthy. It's in fact the opposite, that the water is moving through so rapidly that there's not really much ecosystem function happening at all in those waterways. Does that make sense? But you probably know where I'm going next, and that is when we look at forest cover, we see the inverse relationship. Again, really good big green flag. As you have more forest on the landscape, you see a decrease in the amount of salt entering the waterway. And this is due to a handful of reasons. Part of which is that chloride should be a limited resource on the landscape. It should be present from the weathering of rocks, and should be trace. So when you introduce a lot of salt into the landscape, it actually does get sucked up by a number of trees and plants, particularly milkweed will bioaccumulate chlorides pretty quickly, which is why you see lots of milkweed growing in areas along roadways that otherwise plants are not tending to grow. But additionally, if you have more forest, you likely have less salted surfaces, so you're decreasing your salt application. Again, we have this very complex relationship, kind of where you have low forest cover and high impervious. These are the same several sites that had a bizarre relationship in the previous graph. So there is one site that has high impervious and high forest and high salt. And this is a tiny little tributary that is several feet away from a major roadway. So we think what is actually happening is there's like direct deposit taking place. But again, we're just starting to scratch the surface of this complex relationship in the data analysis. Are you all with me so far? Okay. So, absolutely.
Why is there less salt when there are more trees? I mean, that sounds, but if we still put the salt on the road, just and plant more trees, would there then be less of a problem? What happens with that salt? What do the trees do with that it is less than in other areas?
That's a fantastic question. So for everyone online, if you didn't hear that, the question was, what are the trees doing to reduce the amount of salt? And if we plant more trees, will that actually attenuate the problem or reduce the impact? And I'm going to say the most annoying thing, it's complicated. So for what we're seeing is where you have more forest cover, a lot of that is usually right along the banks, and those trees will act as a filtration system. So they slow the rate of water entering the stream from the landscape. And they can act as a filtration system with more of the water soaking into the soil than flushing right into the creek. So what they're doing is acting a little bit like a sieve. They're catching that salt before it's flowing directly in. However, what we saw during the drought last year was all of our sites got saltier. So while they might be slowing and reducing the impact from the initial salt flush, they're just holding it back. It is what looks like the trend. So the groundwater and the soil is still salty, but there's also this relationship where if you have more trees, you have less surfaces that you're applying salt to. So it may be a function of there's just less being applied in those areas. And so that's where it starts to get a little squishy. And there are a number of researchers who are trying to figure out that relationship. So we do know that there is some uptake into plants. It's probably pretty minimal because if you have too much salt in your soil and that sodium starts to build up, then that becomes a war crime, right? Salting the soils starts to kill the plants that you're trying to grow. So it's not uncommon, especially in the spring, if there's been a big pile of salt sitting on the side of the road all winter, and nothing will grow there ever again. It feels like it takes a while for that to flush out. So it's a complicated relationship, and we're not entirely sure but I know there are groups like here at Westchester, there are researchers looking at that question. At Stroudwater Research Center, there's a lot of people really dedicated to this question of what can we do? Because the buildup is as such now that we know that there's going to be a long-term issue, even if we stopped applying salt entirely today. So does that help provide some context? Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. And one we grapple with. So all the data that we got is supporting what the state's integrated waters data set shows, that the issues being faced by Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creeks are not unique. These are trends that are persistent across the state and across the mid-Atlantic in a big way, especially with salt. So the last component I'm going to introduce for the sake of time today is nutrients, which includes nitrogen and phosphorus. So we only have nitrogen and phosphorus data for our high frequency data set. And nutrients are chemical compounds that all life needs in order to grow and thrive. So these, again, should be trace on the landscape. We shouldn't have an overabundance of nutrients. When we do, from the overapplication of fertilizer, from leaky septic and sewer systems, from concentrated animal waste, we start to see an impact on a process called eutrophication, which is the overgrowth of plants and algae, followed by the death of those plants and algae and the overconsumption of oxygen, which can lead to highly toxic conditions in streams. So one of the, I think, biggest news stories that comes up with eutrophication are harmful algal blooms, which are bad for human health and they're bad for our environment. So when we're looking at our data set, we're concerned about these over-application of human-driven goals of fertilizing lawns, not maintaining your septic, and animal waste. But with the increased rainfall regime, we are also concerned about erosion. So phosphorus and nitrogen can build up in our soils. And when we have major storms that cause rapid erosion and loss of sediment from our headwater streams, that flushes down and can lead to an overabundance of nutrients in downstream regions. So when you are going about your life, keep an eye out for stream banks that look like this, like they have been scooped out with an ice cream scoop. Or if there are a lot of exposed small roots after a rainstorm, that is evidence of recent erosion. And all of that sediment goes downstream somewhere else. And it's really an interesting problem that we have, because as we add more impervious surface to the landscape, it increases the amount of energy per storm entering a stream. And when we are thinking about stream habitat, energy is the big question. Where is that flow going? And so Hurricane Ida in 2021 exported hundreds of millions of tons of sediment from headwaters down into the Delaware Bay. And these major storms can cause major problems that are very difficult and complicated to remediate. So understanding our headwater small order streams like those we are studying in Ridley, Crum, and Darby can give us a lot of context for how to support our downstream systems, both for the wildlife that live there and the people. So when we look at our nutrient data, we see some really interesting trends. So the light blue sites are our Ridley Creek sites. Green and purple are Darby and Crum Creek. And we saw a really interesting trend with this orange line being the DEP threshold for excess nitrogen. Almost all of our Ridley Creek sites have too much nitrogen, and the phosphorus data set shows the exact same trend, and we're not entirely sure why. But when we look at the relationship between our land use, we see as you increase tree cover, unsurprisingly, trees love fertilizers, it reduces the amount of nitrogen in the waterway. So this is one of the most maybe intuitive, but also encouraging pieces of data that we've found, especially for Ridley Creek. And I'll present a brief case study on what we're doing to start to address this. But where you have known excess nutrients, one of the best solutions is to just plant it like crazy. And if you have a lot of property that is being mowed up to the water's edge, just let it get taller. Mow less frequently, and that can help. It goes a long way to address some of these issues with water quality degradation. So some key takeaways. We know Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creeks are all directly impaired by temperature and salt, and Ridley Creek is struggling with nutrients. We also know that land use matters. If we can protect forests as it stands, we can go a long way to just protecting the existing watershed infrastructure. And if we can protect open space and restore it, we can go a long way, especially in the headwaters, to creating more stable ecosystems downstream. And we can make life better for our wildlife and our neighbors who live just downstream from us. So very quickly, I want to touch on one of the restoration projects we've been working on at Ashbridge Preserve, which is a publicly accessible preserve on East Strasburg Road in East Goshen. So it's probably 10 minutes from here if you're looking for a nice place to walk. There is a 5-acre field that we identified as a restoration priority in 2017. This site used to be a pond. On Google Maps, it's still called Sinkler Lake. It has not been a lake since the 90s, but a dam was installed at this downstream section in the 1800s, which coincided with the rapid deforestation of the upstream watershed to make way for agricultural space. And as those trees were removed, that delicious topsoil flowed into the creeks and then got caught behind this dam, creating what we call legacy sediment. In 2017, it was full of an invasive grass called canary reed grass, and it had very low ecological value. The main wildlife we found were deer ticks. So it was not a popular place to visit. It was kind of a miserable spot. And you can see Ridley Creek runs straight as an arrow through. So it is channelized, it was slow moving, and the sediment was very dark and it was poorly shaded, meaning it was hot, it was salty, it was nutrient rich. So it really was the perfect place to begin to do some restoration. So in 2019, we began planting trees funded by the Pennsylvania DCNR Riparian Restoration Grant, C2P2. So this is what it looked like in June 2018. It was shallow, slow moving. There was not a lot of fish activity in this creek. And beginning in 2019, we planted our first 125 trees. We were very proud of ourselves. And then we kept planting and we kept planting and we kept planting and we kept planting. And so over the period of about 5 years, we planted almost the entire 5-acre section. We excluded this kind of bottom portion of the planting because as we were working it, we realized it was a wetland that was actively trying to turn itself back into a wetland. So rather than fight nature to plant trees, we adjusted our planting boundary. So just as a reminder, this was before and this was after. And the impact on the watershed was almost immediate. We planted over 1,500 trees over 4 years. We planted 54 different species of native trees and shrubs, and we acquired over 2,100 volunteer hours to do this. This was a community building project, and it was amazing because this site went from being probably the least visited preserve to one of our busiest. And if you're curious about the plants that we planted, here's the full list. All of our plants came from Octoraro Nursery, which provides incredible stock and all locally generated. And it's really, really cool to watch how quickly these plants have established themselves and begun to immediately cause improvements. These are some of the fastest growing trees I've ever seen. This is a very flood prone site, and just upstream is a wastewater treatment plant. So when there's flooding, there's a beautiful nutrient rich goo that comes through and feeds all of our trees. Also, it's incredible soil. It's the best tree planting ever. There were no wrecks. It's great. And the nutrient-rich soil from being regularly flooded for dozens of years, and the fact that it is this luscious topsoil from our forests long past has provided the perfect substrate for our rapidly growing woods. So if you go and visit, don't expect any trees you plant to grow like this. This is a very unique site. Our sycamores are 5 years old and almost 30 feet tall in this big around. It's so cool. But the roots have begun to slow the sediment migration. The stream is starting to begin to meander again instead of moving straight. There's a diversity of habitat structure within the creek. We didn't go in and change anything. We just let the stream start to adjust itself. And then I didn't include any bug data, but I'm an aquatic entomologist. So the fall autumn leaf drop has provided a ton of amazing food sources for our stream insects, which means between the flowering and fruiting trees and all of a sudden the bug diversity coming out of this creek, this is one of the best birding areas in any of our public preserves. It's currently full of kinglets. If you like birds, it's a great place to go. And it's created habitat for wildlife that otherwise would never have stopped in this area. And speaking of habitat creation, we did a lot of work, but the day after we planted our 1,000th tree, we came home to 999 because beavers showed up. And Castor canadensis does my job better, faster, and cheaper. And so beavers arrived. We don't have a lot of information if they were in Ashbridge Preserve historically, but we do know they're there now. They come back almost every year and begin causing a ruckus. So after the very brief moment of panic when they started cutting our trees that were protected in plastic tubes, we quickly moved to metal tubes, metal cages, which worked great. They don't mess with. But the beavers have built a lot of infrastructure, including dams. And this dam showed up last year and was one of 3 in a beaver complex. And we knew they were there because our monitor, our depth logger, showed that we had a rapid increase in depth in Ridley Creek over the course of October, when every other site was going dry. The beavers showed up and beautifully built a dam that was going to keep our huge restoration planting going through the dry fall. But on top of the support that they provide to our work, they also provide habitat for some really charismatic wildlife. These are American mink, Neogale vision. So when our beavers arrived at Ashbridge, we put out a bunch of spy cams. And what we learned very quickly was that American mink, which are a bioindicator for healthy habitat, were all over the place. We had several distinct population of mink who were hunting regularly in Ridley Creek. This family of mink is actually from the Crum Creek watershed at Kirkwood Preserve, but they use the habitat created by the beavers, which are very popular with field mice and voles. They come and hunt at night, which is also great if you plant trees. Voles are one of my least favorite animals on the whole planet because they will eat the trees they plant. So love to have support from a small mesopredator. But when it comes 2023, on a game cam that was put out to monitor this footage of an American river otter. And it is the first documented river otter in the Ridley years. So the American river otter was driven almost to extinction for harvest and decline. These are local predators. They require a lot of habitat. They require to survive and to thrive. And so the fact that we caught them on camera, having returned to this area, was a huge green flag that the restoration work that's been taking place is working. And more importantly, this went viral and led to tons of other people, individuals, conservation groups, sharing footage of their otters that had not been seen in their watersheds. And very quickly, the state fur bearer biologist after I spoke with him about this, called me and said, all of a sudden we have all of this new data. This is so exciting. And we're excited because these guys are just so cool. There's a lot of cool stuff about otters. I'd keep you here until dinner time talking about them. You know, most importantly, this is a huge, huge sign that the restoration work is actually having an impact. And so the findings of our wildlife show that Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creek, even though they're considered impaired, are still critical wildlife habitat. And the legacy of protected open space by my land trust, but by many others, and the restoration work that's taking place by so many people in the region is having a direct impact on really fascinating, both adorable wildlife and water chemistry. And the restoration of our landscape is key. Every person makes a difference. It doesn't matter if you are planting 1,500 trees in a preserve or planting one native plant at the edge of your garden or picking up trash where you see it. Every action has an impact and every person makes a difference in the landscape. We are all part of this incredible system. So working together, even in small ways, can really lead us to success. And finally, it's imperative that we continue to monitor our stream health. Change comes very slowly to a highly impacted system. And so as we are doing these improvements, it's important to watch and monitor, because if it's working really well, let's do more of it. If it's not that impactful, maybe we tailor it back. And getting people connected to our waterways is one of the most important things that we can do. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your patience and your interest. And here is all of the data is available online if you want to explore it. So thank you so much, and happy to take some questions.
We usually pause now just if anybody has to go to class or something like that, you're welcome to leave. If you have the time, it'd be great to have some questions answered. And that goes for folks on Zoom too. See them want to expand the view in case they have any questions too.
I know I'm always first, but I need to leave it in one quick.
Yeah.
Sorry. If we would use sand instead of salt or little stones or something, I think that would be better, but would that also cause other problems? Like that. You know what I'm saying? You try to solve something, but then that creates other problems.
Yes, so grit is the kind of class that is considered, is used in a lot of places, like particularly the Midwest. Grit is very popular. It does cause other issues, but they seem to be fairly minor compared to the salt problem. There are also adaptations that we can start to make with our own behaviors. Like I feel like we all have that neighbor who puts 100 pounds of salt out on their like 8-foot long driveway. If you put salt down and the storm passes and you still have salt on your driveway, sweep it up and use it again. You can save money and save the environment in one go. And if you are looking to stay safe, read the packaging. Salt, you only need a little bit to make a difference. And at the municipal level, there's a lot of effort being put into switching from salt trucks to brine trucks, which have a lower salt concentration. And out west, it is common to have a specially designed kind of plow. It's called a live edge plow, which actually scrapes further down to the road. So it reduces that ice buildup, which is what the salt is supposed to help with. But also we know after COVID, we have the capacity to work from home. So we don't need to be driving 80 miles an hour immediately after a snowstorm. Shift that I don't know if we're ready for. But yeah.
Very, very enlightening presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. And then Cheryl Wanko asks online, do we know what PennDOT is doing? Yes, PennDOT is doing a lot to keep the roads clear. They actually are pretty restricted on their salt application because it costs taxpayer money. So they're pretty smart about it. However, they could be smarter. So I am not in contact with PennDOT, but I know the Stroud Water Research Center does have contacts with PennDOT, and they're working on doing education and training with the salt applicators. So one of the tricks to it is, elections are won and lost based on how you keep the roads clear. And so there is that kind of push and pull of safety and liability and then environmental responsibility that is a delicate dance. And I am not specialized in that discussion. So I can't say in detail what they're doing, except I'm aware that they are working on and looking at the issues of application. So great question. Yeah, Paul?
I have a theory. So whenever CRC streams cleanup happens, the salt monitoring at all the
Mhm.
cleanup sites. So Westchester, streams below Westchester and Media were the highest concentration.
Yeah.
And we got some anecdotal evidence that the lawyers in those county seat towns put a lot of salt out of their offices.
Yep.
Liability conscious lawyers.
And that's a solid theory. And I feel like that's the community that you engage with sweeping up afterwards. Because honestly, I feel like that salt, after the ice is gone, it becomes really slippery when it's just like rolling around and you're trying to walk. So maybe that's the angle. Someone twists an ankle on the rock salt.
That we're approaching with our municipal letter. Because the public works department is actually very responsive.
Yeah, a big piece of the salt situation is a lack of awareness of how dangerous it is. I mean, we put sodium chloride on our food. We eat it, like it can't be that bad, right? And so increasing awareness is one of the major hurdles in making sure that we're taking responsible next steps. And because everyone's trying to do the right thing. And unfortunately, it's just overabundantly right till the point that it's wrong.
I have a question about
Sure.
the funds and nutrients and
Mhm.
really quick. So your monitoring sites must be mostly above Ridley State Park.
Yes, so Ridley Creek State Park is our lowest, most downstream sample site. And then we're at Okahocking Preserve, Ashbridge Preserve, and then the East Branch and West Branch of Ridley Creek at Boot Road. And we have a strong suspicion of what's going on. It's West Branch, Ridley Creek has 2 to 3 times the nutrient level of all other sites, to the point that it is dragging up everything downstream.
There's a lot of legacy sevens because you've got Hershey's Mill up there.
Yes, and they have a wastewater treatment plant pond, and they also mow up to the water's edge along most of the golf course. We tried to put a sample site in there and they were not too keen on it. So we're working on building relationships within the community to hopefully identify what the issue is. Because if it is a problem, like the treatment pond is just direct discharging, we could help support plantings or wetland installation in those areas to help alleviate that issue.
And just a question.
Yeah.
All that. Is West Branch Ridley Creek now an official name with the Board of Geographic Names? Because it wasn't 10 years ago.
Believe it is.
That's good.
Yes.
That's key.
Because yeah.
You're taking that name up from mapping.
Yes. Yeah, so it's RC1 and WBRC1. So West Branch.
Also 10 years ago, Goose Creek was not a real name.
Really?
Yeah, it's true.
I feel like I hear so much about the Goose Creek Get Down and
no, I know it's official now.
Yeah.
I went on the Board of Geographic Names website, and I said, Goose Creek, I've got to talk to the people at the Goose Creek Alliance and make sure that it's the official name.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't. And it is now. I have
Nice.
to notice that just like 2 weeks before I looked it up, it had been made official.
That's awesome.
Yes, and Cheryl says Megan Fork is on the Goose Creek board, and Megan was who I was thinking of with a lot of the salt work that she's doing.
Exactly. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah. Well, great. I know we've come up on 1 o'clock, so okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having
Of
me.
course, and thanks to everybody on Zoom too.
I have an off the record question.
Sure.